Over the past few weeks, our class of 7th and 8th graders here at the Wendy and Averin Fogelman Religious School has been putting together small museum exhibits highlighting the lives of Jews throughout history. Now, the students had the opportunity to choose from a list of historical figures that we hoped would expand a little bit beyond the typical names you might think of. Now, that said, naturally the students flocked to some more expected choices. Ruth Handler, the inventor of the Barbie doll and co-founder of Mattel. Baseball great Sandy Koufax, of course. Of course, we assumed that the students would flock to these names, as well as a couple of lesser-known but intriguing figures like Samuel Palache. Anyone in here heard of Samuel Palache? Okay, good. We did a good job with it. A 16th century Moroccan Jewish merchant, and here's the kicker, pirate. He was a known pirate. So, of course, they see that name, they see pirate, they're all excited. But the 7th and 8th graders also surprised us, as they are prone to do, choosing the name of someone I myself was not familiar with before preparing this lesson. Now, this one group of students chose to highlight the life of Mileva Maric. Please forgive any incorrect pronunciations, but Mileva Maric was the first wife of Albert Einstein, and she was born in modern-day Serbia in 1875. Now, she and Einstein met while studying at the Zurich Polytechnic University and were married from 1903 to 1919. Before the 1980s, 1990s or so, Maric was a largely unknown figure. A better-known figure would have been Albert Einstein's second wife. But she quickly became the topic of wide debate, as many theorized, based on personal letters and other papers that were eventually published, that she had a significant impact on Einstein's groundbreaking work in physics. Books and research abounded as to how this unrecognized, yet evidently brilliant woman could have been overlooked in the story of one of the world's greatest modern minds. It was a story I think we're all familiar with, one of an unsung hero, oftentimes a woman, who is conveniently removed from the historical narrative. Now, more recently, these theories have largely been debunked, based on historians' careful reading of the same documents. But as the authors of the 2019 biography, Einstein's Wife, explain, that doesn't mean her story is without significance. They write that the documents reveal, quote, the very human, real story of a fallible yet brave and determined young woman who, for various reasons, was not able to fulfill her dreams for the career and marriage she had hoped for. This more realistic and compelling story of Mileva Maric offers a far greater service to her and to readers' appreciation of her international pioneering role in helping to open science and science education to female students than any exaggerated or unfounded assertions regarding her activities. Though the story of Mileva Maric may not have been the victim of a blatant cover-up of her contributions, the fascination with her life and relationship with Einstein highlights the fact that there are many inspiring and fascinating stories that are so often lost from our history. Though she may not have been some secret collaborator in Einstein's theories, it is likely that she did have a significant impact on his life. And so it is with many of these singular figures we examine and maybe do school projects about. We celebrate and, dare I say, even idolize their achievements and impact, yet so often separate them from the context and perhaps more importantly, the relationships that likely contributed to and shaped their work. In his 2014 book, Powers of Two, writer Joshua Wolf Shank challenges the assumptions that lead to what he describes as a lone genius culture. A set of assumptions about creativity and success, perhaps best summarized by the famous Thomas Carlyle quote, "The history of the world is but the biography of great men." Over the course of his book, Shank challenges this assumption, laying out the many times that innovation and inspiration more often comes not just from extraordinary individuals, but in fact from the creative chemistry between two individuals, or to use the Jewish term for study partners, historical chavrutas. While his book mainly focuses on those famous duos, Lennon and McCartney, Jobs and Wozniak, Tolkien and Lewis, what I found most fascinating was all of these names that I wasn't familiar with before. And so is the case in modern history, and all the more so is the case in the history of Jewish tradition as well. With these unsung heroes and lost stories in our minds, we might look at this week's Torah portion, Vayetze, a bit differently. The Parsha continues the story of Jacob, laying out his journey of labor and love that leads to the marriage to him and Leah and Rachel. We often focus on the struggle of Jacob, the deception and cruelty of Laban, and the interwoven relationships between Rachel, Leah, and Jacob. Of course, many of our traditional commentaries and midrashim focus on, you guessed it, Jacob. After all, it is his new name, Israel, which he is soon to receive, coming up. A little bit of a spoiler, I apologize. That comes to be the name of our people. That's his name. But Rachel and Leah, despite their appearance in some other biblical texts, as well as commentaries, often play a side role in this larger story. Perhaps the best evidence of this more minor role in the larger Jewish story can be found right here. Or I guess not this one specifically, but in our prayer book, and in particular our traditional prayer book. Now, the first blessing of the Amidah, which Emily led for us so beautifully just moments ago, calls upon God's relationship with our ancestors as a reminder to maintain that relationship, for God to maintain that relationship with us today. Now, in addition to referring to God as, quote, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, we also pray to the God of Sarah, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Velohei Leah, God of Sarah, God of Rebekah, God of Rachel, and God of Leah. But this was not always the language that we had in our prayer books. Traditionally, this blessing only includes mention of the Avot, literally the fathers or the patriarchs, and goes on to mention Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob by name. And it was not until the advancements of Jewish feminism in the 1970s and 80s that the matriarchs, the imahot, were eventually included in this blessing. They were first published by the conservative movement in their prayer book in 1990, and first published in our reform movement in the Gates of Prayer for Shabbat in 1992. Now, this new version, which has become traditional, I think, for many of us, sought to bring stories, figures, and people frequently pushed into the margins, into the forefront of our minds and our hearts, serving as a reminder that our spiritual journey has always been guided by the mixed multitude, folks of all genders who maintain through their lives and through their actions our ongoing relationship with God. But tonight, I want to lift up the names of two women who still remain largely unknown and unrecognized for their contribution to the story of our people. When Rachel and Leah left their father's home to begin their new lives with Jacob, they brought with them 2 maids or servants named Bilhah and Zilpah. And as we know from the story of Hagar, Sarah, and Abraham, these maids often serve not just as servants, but as surrogate mothers as well. This week's parashah shows us that they too played a foundational role in the story of our people. Bilhah gave birth to Gad and Asher, Zilpah giving birth to Dan and Naphtali, these 4 sons of Jacob who eventually grow to become 4 of the 12 tribes of Israel. Their names and their stories, our text seems to teach, are too worth remembering. Now, in recent years, many communities have indeed included the names of Bilhah and Zilpah in this first blessing of the Amidah. You might hear it at some synagogues or online services you may attend. And this is all in an effort to move them from the margins to the center of our collective story. And as was the case with the story of Mileva Maric and Albert Einstein, many see this as a bit of an overcorrection, offering strong textual arguments for why their inclusion in the first blessing might be acceptable and might certainly be praiseworthy, but isn't quite necessary to the point of including them in new prayer books. This was the position taken by the CCAR, our own reform movement's leadership. Tonight, I'm not going to weigh in on either side of the argument. That's not what I want to lift up for tonight. But tonight I simply hope that we can hear these names, Bilhah and Zilpah, and carry their stories with our own, because they, like Mileva Maric, deserve to be known. They deserve to be acknowledged. They deserve to be remembered. They illuminate for us the many names of folks who may not have the same fame and renown as the heroes or visionaries of our stories, but made an impact nonetheless, likely in ways that we now can only theorize. So on this Shabbat, may we hold the names of those who, like Bilhah and Zilpah, may not come to mind as easily, yet whose legacy we continue to enjoy all these years later. May we find our innate curiosity, seeking out the names and the margins of our stories who are still worthy of recognition. And may we strive to be worthy of the inheritance left to us by those many souls, both named and unnamed, who made gifts of their lives and helped to usher in a new world for all of those who came after. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be God's will. And let us say together, Amen.